Bach and Avaric rode in the coach, and Grammatic was made to ride on top with the luggage. Elphaba met Bach's eyes from time to time, grimacing, but she ignored Avaric, to whom she had taken an instant dislike. When he had finished with the pages of his racing form, Avaric teased Bach about this trip. "I should have known when I left for the summer that you were mooning about in the throes of love. You developed this serious set of chin. It misled me. I thought it was consumption at least. You should have come out with me that night before I left." A visit to the philosophy club would have been just what the doctor ordered. Buck was mortified to have such a dive mentioned in the presence of a female, but Elphaba seemed to take no offense. Perhaps she didn't know what it was. He tried to steer Avaric away from the subject. "You don't know Miss Galinda, but you will find her charming," he said. "I guarantee that." "And she will probably find you charming," he thought, a bit late in the day. But he was even willing to live with that, if it was the price of helping Galinda out of a tricky situation. Avaric was regarding Elphaba with contempt. "Miss Elphaba," he said formally, "does your name imply any elf blood in your background?" "What a novel idea," said Elphaba. "If there were, I suppose my limbs would be as brittle as uncooked pasta and come apart with the slightest of pressure. Would you care to apply some force?" She proffered a forearm, green as a spring limeberry. "Do, I beg you, so we can settle this question for once for all. We shall conclude that the relative force you need to break my arm, as opposed to other arms you have broken, is proportionate to the relative amount of human versus elfin blood in my veins." "I certainly will not touch you," said Avaric, managing to say many things at once. "The elf in the self-regrets," said Elphaba. "Were you to have dismembered me, I might have been posted back to Shin in small pieces and been spared the tedium of this forced holiday and this company." "Oh, Elfie," Buck sighed. "This isn't a good start, you know." "I think it's swell," said Avaric, glaring. "I didn't think friendship required this much," snapped Elphaba to Buck. "I was better off before." It was late afternoon by the time they arrived in Neverdale and settled at the inn and made their way by foot along the lake to Caprice in the Pines. Two older women were in the sunlight by the portico, shelling string beans and restauranteurs. The one Bulk recognized was Amma Clutch, Galinda's chaperone. The other must be the minder of Miss Shinshin or Miss Fanny. They started at the sight of the procession coming up the drive, and Amma Clutch leaned forward, the string beans spilling out of her lap. "Well, I never," she said as they drew near. "It's Miss Elfie herself. My uncle's whiskers I never did." She pulled herself to her feet and clasped Elphaba into her arms. Elphaba stood as stiff as a plaster figure. "Give us a minute to be catching our breath, duckies," said Amma Clutch. "Whatever in the blameless heaven are you doing here?" "Miss Elphaba, it don't seem possible." "I have been invited by Miss Galinda," said Elphaba, "and my fellow travelers here insisted they wanted to accompany me, so I find myself compelled to accept." "I know nothing of this," said Amma Clutch. "Miss Elphaba, let me take that heavy reticule and find you something clean to put on. You must be frayed from the voyage. You gentlemen will be staying in the village, of course, but for now, the girls are in the summer house at the edge of the lake." The travelers made their way along a path interrupted with stone steps at the steeper parts. Grammatic took longer as steps and was left behind, and no one was inclined to stay and lend a hand to a figure with such a hard skin and clockwork thoughts. Skirting the final growth of holly flight bushes, they came upon the gazebo. It was a skeleton house of unstripped logs, 6 sides open to the breezes, with a fretwork of arabesquing twigs, and Lake George a mighty field of blue beyond. The girls were sitting on steps and in wicker chairs, and Amma Clip was lost in some small work involving 3 needles and many colors of thread. The girls raised their heads. In evanescent summer frocks, free of hoops and bustles, they looked like birds about to scatter. Holy terror! said Galinda, her jaw dropping. What are you doing here? I'm not decent, shrieked Shenshen, drawing attention to her unshod feet and pale exposed ankles. Fanny bit one corner of her lip and tried to revise her smirk into a smile of welcome. I am not staying for long, said Elphaba. By the way, girls, this is Master Avaric, the Margrave descending from Ten Meadows, Gillikin. And this is Master Bach from Munchkinland. They're both at Briscoe Hall, Master Avaric, as if you can't tell by the lovesick expression in Bach's face. This is Miss Galinda of the Arjuenas, and Miss Shenshen, and Miss Fanny, who can outline their own pedigrees perfectly well. But how enchanting and how naughty, said Miss Shenshen. Miss Elphaba, who never giveth us the time of day, you have redeemed yourself for all time by this pleasant surprise. How do you do, gentlemen? But, stammered Galinda, but why are you here? What's wrong? I am here because I stupidly mentioned your invitation to Master Bach, who saw it as a sign from the unnamed god that we should visit. But at this Miss Fanny could control herself no longer, and fell on the floor of the gazebo, writhing in laughter. What? Said Shenshen. What? But what invitation are you talking about? Asked Galinda. I don't need to show you, said Elphaba. For the first time since Buck had known her, she looked confused. Surely I don't need to bring it out. I believe I have been set up to be mortified, said Galinda, glaring at the helpless Fanny. I'm being humiliated for sport. This is not funny, Miss Fanny. I have half a mind to kick you. Just then Grammatic made it around the edge of the holly flight bush. The sight of the stupid copper thing teetering on the edge of a stone step made Shenshen collapse against a column and join Fanny in uncontrollable laughter. Even Amma Clip smiled to herself as she began to put away her materials. But what is going on? Said Elphaba. Were you born to plague me? Galinda said tearfully to her roomie, Did I ask for your association? Don't, said Bach. Don't, Miss Galinda. Please don't say another word. You're upset. I wrote the letter, heaved Fanny between her gales of laughter. Avaric began to chuckle, and Elphaba's eyes went wide and a little unfocused. You mean you didn't write to invite me to visit here? Said Elphaba to Galinda. Oh dear, no, I did not, said Galinda. In her anger, she was beginning to regain some control, even though Bach guessed damage had been done for good. My darling Miss Elphaba, I wouldn't have dreamed of exposing you to such thoughtless cruelties as these girls perpetrate on each other and on me for sheer amusement. Besides, you have no place in a setting like this. But I've been invited, said Elphaba. Miss Fanny, you wrote that letter instead of Miss Galinda. You ate it up, chortled Fanny. Well, this is your home, and I accept your invitation, even if it was written under false pretenses, Elphaba said, her voice evenly matter-of-fact as she stared into Miss Fanny's narrowed eyes. I'll go up and unpack my bags. She strode away. Only Grammatic followed. The air went stale with things unsaid by and by. Fanny's hysteria grew quieter, and she merely snorted and wheezed and then grew still, lying vaporishly and unkempt on the flagstone floor of the gazebo. Well, you all needn't pierce me with your sniffy attitudes, she said at last. It was a joke. Elphaba stayed in her room for a day. Galinda came and went with the dinner. On occasion she would stay for a few minutes. So the boys took to swimming and rowing on the lake with the girls. Bulk tried to fan in himself an interest in Shenshen or Fanny, who certainly were coquettish enough, but they both seemed besotted with Avaric. At last Bulk cornered Galinda on the porch and pleaded with her to talk with him. She agreed, a measure of her demure demeanor returning, and they sat a short distance apart on a swing. I suppose I'm to blame for not seeing through that ruse, said Bach. Elfie wasn't inclined to accept that invitation. I made her. What is this, Elfie? Said Galinda. Where has propriety gone this summer, I ask you? We've become friends. Well, I can promise to have gathered that. Why did you make her accept an invitation? Didn't you know I'd never write such a thing? How should I know that? You're her roomie, by executive order of Madame Momble, not by choice. I care to have that remembered. I didn't know. You seem to get along. She sniffed and curled a lip, but it seemed to be a remark to herself. Bach continued, If you've been woefully humiliated, why don't you leave? Perhaps I shall, she said. I'm considering. Elphaba says that to leave is to admit defeat. Yet if she comes out of her hiding and begins to trip along with the rest of you and me, the joke will be unbearable. They don't like her, she explained. Well, neither do you, I'd say, said Bach in an explosive whisper. It's different. I have a right and a reason, she retorted. I am forced to put up with her. And all because my stupid ama stepped on a rusty nail in the railway station in Frodica and missed the orientation. My whole academic career up in smoke because of my ama's carelessness. When I'm a sorcerer, I'll have my revenge on her for that. You could say that Elphaba brought us together, said Bach softly. I'm closer to her, and so I'm closer to you. Galinda seemed to give up. She leaned her head back on the velvet cushions of the swing and said, Bach, you know, despite myself, I think you're a little sweet. You're a little sweet, and you're a little charming, and you're a little maddening, and you're a little habit-forming. Bach held his breath. But you're little, and she concluded. You're a munchkin, for God's sake. He kissed her, he kissed her, he kissed her, little by little by little. The next day, Elphaba, Galinda, Bach, and Grammatic, and of course Emma Clutch, made the 6-hour trip back to Shin with fewer than a dozen remarks among them. Avaric stayed behind to disport himself with Fanny and Shen Shen. The pestering rain took up at the outskirts of Shin, and the august facades of Crage Hall and Briscoe Hall were nearly obliterated with mist by the time they were at last home. Bach didn't have time or inclination to remark on his romance when he saw Crope and Tibbet. The rhino librarian, having paid scant attention to the boys or their progress all summer, had suddenly toned on to how little had been achieved, and was all rheumatic buffs and watchful eyes. The boys chattered little. They brushed and cleaned vellum and rubbed finfoot oil on leather bindings and polished brass clasps. Only a few days left of this tedium. Attention to the subject matter of the materials, but his eye was drawn to the bright red paint applied in the illustration. It was a picture, maybe 400 or 500 years old, of a Cumbric witch. Some monk's visionary zeal or anxiety about magic had inspired his brush. The witch stood on an isthmus, connecting two rocky lands, and on either side of her stretched patches of cerulean blue sea, with white-lipped waves of astonishing vigor and particularity. The witch held in her hands a beast of unrecognizable species, though it was clearly drowned or nearly drowned. She cradled it in an arm. That, without attention to actual skeletal flexibility, lovingly encircled the beast's wet, spiky, furred back. With her other hand she was freeing a breast from her robe, offering suck to the creature. Her expression was hard to read, or had the monk's hand smudged, or age and grime bestowed a sfumato sympathy. She was nearly motherly with miserable child. Her look was inward or sad or something, but her feet didn't match her expression, for they were planted on the narrow strand with prehensile grip, apparent even through the silver-colored shoes, whose corn of the realm brilliance had first caught Bach's eye. Furthermore, the feet were turned out at 90-degree angles to the shins. They showed in profile as mirror images, heels clicked together and toes pointing in opposite directions, like a stance in ballet. The gown was a hazy dawn blue. He guessed by the jeweled tones of the work that the document hadn't been opened in centuries. Dramatically or theologically, this image seemed some sort of a hybrid of the creation myths of the animals. Here were the floodwaters, whether they derived from legends of Lurline or the unnamed god, whether they were rising or sinking. Was the Cumbric witch interfering with or accomplishing the ordained fate of the beast? Though in a script too crabbed and archaic for Bourke to decipher, perhaps this document supported the fable of a Cumbric witch spell that gave the animals the gifts of speech, memory, and remorse. Perhaps it merely refuted it, but glowingly. Any way you looked at it, there was the syncretism of myth's happy appetite to engorge on narrative strains. Maybe this painting was a suggestion of some alarmed monk that the animals received there. Strength through yet another sort of baptism, by nursing at the teat of the Cumbric witch, inducted through the milk of the witch. Such analysis wasn't his strong point. He had a hard enough time with the nutrients in common. Pastor Barley, he should do the unthinkable and deliver this actual scroll to Dr. Dillamond. It would be valuable to know about, or maybe, he thought as he hurried to meet Elphaba, the thing safely smuggled into the deep pocket of his cape and out of the Three Queens library. Maybe the witch wasn't feeding the drenched animal, but killing it, sacrificing it to stay the floods. Art was way beyond him. He had run into Amma Clutch in the bazaar and begged her to deliver a note to Elphaba, the good. Woman seemed more sympathetic than usual to him. Was Galinda singing his praises in the privacy of her room? It was his first time to see the funny green jumping bean since Amy and back in Shin. And there she was, on time, arriving at the cafe as requested, in a gray ghost of a dress with a knitted over pull, fraying at the sleeves, and a man's umbrella, big and black and lance-like, when rolled up. Elphaba sat down with a graceless fromp and examined the Cyril. She looked at it more closely than she would bring herself to look at Bach, but she listened to his exegesis and thought it feeble. What prevents this from being the Fairy Queen Lurline? She asked. Well, the accoutrements of glamour are missing. I mean the golden nimbus of hair, the elegance, the transparent wings, the wand. Those silver shoes are pretty gaudy. She munched on a dry biscuit. It doesn't look like a portrait of determination or, Genesis. It looks reactive, rather than proactive. That figure is at the very least confused, don't you think? You've been hanging around Crope and Tibbet too long. Go back to your barley, she said, pocketing the thing. You're getting vague and artsy, but I'll give it to Dr. Dillamond. I'll tell you, he keeps making breakthroughs. This business of opposing lenses has opened up a whole new world of corpuscular architecture. He let me look once, but I couldn't make out much except for stress and bias, color, and pulse. He's very excited. The problem I see now is getting him to stop. I think he's on the verge of founding a whole new branch of knowledge, and every day's findings provoke 100 new questions. Clinical, theoretical, hypothetical, empirical, even ontological, one guess. He's been staying up late at night in the labs. We can see his lights on when we pull the drapes at night. Well, does he need anything more from us? I only have 2 days left in that library and then school starts. I can't get him to focus. I think he's just putting together what he's got. How about Galinda then? He said. If we're done with academic espionage for the time being, how is she? Does she ask for me? Elphaba allowed herself to look at Bach. No, Galinda really hasn't said anything about you, to give you hope you don't deserve. I should add she's hardly said anything to me at all either. She's in a heavy sulk. When will I see her again? Does it mean that much to you? She smiled wanly. Bach, does she really mean that much to you? She is my world, he answered. Your world is too small if she is it. You can't criticize the sign of a world. I can't help it, and I can't stop it, and I can't deny it. I should say you look silly, she said, draining the last drops of lukewarm tea from her cup. I should say you'll look back on this summer and cringe. She may be lovely, Bach. No, she is lovely, I agree. But you're worth a dozen of her. At his shocked expression, she threw up her hands. Not to me. I don't mean me. Please, that stricken look. Spare me. But he wasn't sure if he believed her. She gathered her things in a hurry and rushed out, knocking the spittoon over in a clatter, slicing her big umbrella right through someone's newspaper. She didn't look both ways as she lunged across Railway Square and was nearly mowed down by an old ox on a cumbersome tricycle. The next time Boke saw Elphaba and Galinda, all thoughts of romance fled. It was in the small triangular park outside the gate of Crage Hall. He had been just happening by once again, this time with Avaric in tow. The gates had opened, and Amma Vimp had come flouncing out, face white and nose dripping, and a flurry of girls poured out after her. Among them were Elphaba and Galinda and Shen and Fanny and Mila. Free of their walls, the girls huddled in chattering circles, or stood beneath the trees in shock, or hugged each other and wailed and wiped each other's eyes. Buck and Avaric hurried up to their friends. Elphaba had her shoulders high, like a cat's bony yoke, and hers was the only dry face. She stayed arm's length away from Galinda and the others. Buck longed to take Galinda in his arms, but she didn't look at him more than once before diving her face into Mila's thick fur collar. "What is it? What has happened?" said Avaric. "Miss Shen, Miss Fanny?" "It's too horrible!" they cried, and Galinda nodded, and her nose ran messily along the shoulder seam of Mila's blouse. The police are there, and the doctor, but it seems to be—" "What?" said Buck, and turned to Elphaba. "Elphie, what is it, what?" "They found," she said. Her eyes were glazed like old Shizian porcelain. Somehow the bastards found out. The gate creaked open again, and petals of early autumn vine flowers, blue and purple, came dancing over the college wall. They hung and stepped like butterflies and fell slowly as 3 Cape policemen and a doctor in a dark cap emerged carrying a stretcher. A red blanket had covered the patient, but the wind that tossed the petals caught a corner of the blanket and pulled it back in a triangular fold. The girls all shrieked, and Amma Vimp ran forward to tuck the blanket down, but in the sunlight all had looked down and seen the twisted shoulders and back-thrown head of Doctor Dillamond. His throat was still knotted with congealed ropes of black blood, where it had been slit as thoroughly as if he had wandered into an abattoir. Bulk sat down, disgusted and alarmed, hoping he had not seen death, just a horrible treatable wound. But the police and doctor weren't hurrying. There was no reason to hurry now. Buck fell back against the wall, and Avaric, who had never seen the goat before, held Buck's hands tightly with one hand and covered his own face with the other. Before long, Galinda and Elphaba sank down beside him, and there was some weeping, some long weeping, before words could be spoken. At last, Galinda told the story. "We went to bed last night, and Amma Clutch got up to pull the drapes close, as she does. And she looks down and says almost to herself, 'Well, there's the lights on. Dr. Goat is at it again.' Then she peers a little closer down the yard and says, 'Well, now, isn't that funny?' And I don't pay any attention. I'm just sitting there staring, but Elphaba says, 'What's funny, Amma Clutch?' And Amma Clutch just pulls the drape very tightly and says in a funny voice, 'Oh, nothing, my ducks. I'll just step down to check and make sure everything's all right. As long as you girls are abed.' She says good night and she leaves, and I don't know if she goes down there or what, but we both fall asleep, and in the morning she isn't there with the tea. She always gets the tea. She always does." Galinda gave herself to tears, sinking and then raising herself to her knees and trying to tear her black silk gown with the white epaulets and the white bobbing. Elphaba, dried as a desert stone, continued, We waited until after breakfast, but then we went to Madame Morrable's, said Elphaba, and told her that we didn't know where Amma Clutch was. And Madame Morrable said that Amma Clutch had had a relapse during the night and was recovering in the infirmary. She wouldn't let us in to see her at first. But then when Dr. Dillamond didn't show up for our first lecture of the semester, we wandered over there and just pushed our way in. Amma Clutch was in a hospital bed. Her face looked funny, like the last pancake of the batch, the way it goes all wrong. We said, Amma Clutch, what has happened to you? She didn't say anything even though her eyes were open. She didn't seem to hear us. We thought maybe she was asleep or in shock, but her breathing was regular and her color was good even though her face seemed awry. Then as we were leaving, she turned and she looked at the bedside table. Next to a medicine bottle and a cup of lemon water, there was a long rusty nail on a silver tray. She reached a shaky hand out to the nail and picked it up and held it in her palm tenderly, and she talked to it. She said something like, "Oh, well then, I know you didn't mean to stab my foot last year. You were only trying to get my attention." That's what misbehavior is all about, just a little extra loving being asked for. Well, don't you worry, Nail, because I'm going to love you just as much as you need. And after I have a little nap, you can tell me how you came to be holding up the platform of the railway station at Frodica. For it seems quite a leap from your early years as a common hook for a close for the season sign in that dingy hotel you were talking about. But Bob could not listen to this blather. He could not take in the story of a live nail while a dead goat was being prayed over by hysterical faculty members. Bob could not listen to the sounds of the prayers for the repose of the animal spirit. He could not watch the departure of the corpse when they trundled it away, for it had been clear, with a glimpse of the goat's still face, that whatever had given the doctor his enlivening character had already disappeared. There was no doubt in the minds of anyone who had seen the corpse that the correct word, was murder. The way the pelt about the neck had bunched up, caked together like an improperly cleaned worker's paintbrush, the raw amber hollow in the eye. The official story was that the doctor had broken a magnifying lens and stumbled against it, cutting an artery in the process, but nobody believed it. The only one they could think of to ask, Amma Clutch, merely smiled when they came to visit. With handfuls of pretty yellowing leaves or a plate of late Pertha grapes, she devoured the grapes and chatted with the leaves. It was an ailment no one had ever seen before. Galinda, for out of some belated apology for her initial rudeness to the martyred goat, she now called herself, as he had once called her. Galinda seemed to be stricken dumb before the fact of Amma Clutch. Galinda wouldn't visit nor discuss the poor woman's condition, so Elphaba sneaked in once or twice a day. Buck assumed that Amma Clutch suffered a passing malady. But after 3 weeks, Madame Morrable began to make sounds of concern that Elphaba and Galinda, still roomies, had no chaperone. She suggested the common dormitory for them both. Galinda, who would no longer go to see Madame Morrable on her own, nodded and accepted the demotion. It was Elphaba who came up with a solution, mostly to salvage some shred of Galinda's dignity. Thus it was that 10 days later, Boak found himself in the beer garden of the Cock and Pumpkins, waiting for the midweek coach from the Emerald City. Madame Morrable didn't allow Elphaba and Galinda to join him, so he had to decide for himself which 2 of the 7 passengers alighting were Nanny and Nessarose, the deformities of Elphaba's sister. Were well concealed, Elphaba had warned him. Nessarose could even descend from a carriage with grace, providing the step was secure and the ground flat. He met them, said hello. Nanny was a stewed plum of a woman, red and loose, her old skin looking ready to trail off but for the tucks at the corners of the mouth, the fleshy rivets by the edges of the eyes. More than a score of years in the badlands of Quadling country had made her lethargic, careless, and saturated with resentment. At her age, She ought to have been allowed to nod off in some warm chimney nook. Good to see a little Munchkinlander, she murmured to Bach. It's like the old times. Then she turned and said into the shadows, Come, my poppet. Had he not been warned, Bach wouldn't have taken Nessarose as Elphaba's sister. She was bi, no means green, or even blue-white like a genteel person with bad circulation. Nessarose stepped from the carriage elegantly, gingerly, strangely, sinking her heel to touch the iron step at the same time as her toe. Walking as oddly as she did, she drew attention to her feet, which kept eyes away. From the torso, at least at first. The feet landed on the ground, driven there with a ferocious intention to balance, and Nessarose stood before him. She was, as Elphaba had said, gorgeous, pink, slender as a wheat stalk, and armless. The academic shawl over her shoulders was cunningly folded to soften the shock. Hello, good sir, she said, nodding her head very slightly. The valises are on top. Can you manage? Her voice was as smooth and oiled as Elphaba's was serrated. Nanny propelled Nessarose gently toward the hansom cab that Bach had engaged. He saw that Nessarose did not move well without being able to lean backward against a steadying hand. So now Nanny has to see the girls through their schooling, said Nanny to Bach as they rode along. What with their sainted mother in her waterlogged grave these long years and their father off his head. Well, the family always was bright, and brightness, as you know, decays brilliantly. Madness is the most shining way. The elderly man, the eminent Throp, he's still alive, and sensible as an old plowshare. Survived his daughter and his granddaughter. Elphaba is the Throp third. Nanny, don't gossip, it hurts my soul, Nessarose said. Oh, my pretty, don't you fret. This Bach is an old friend. Or as good as, said Nanny. Out in the swamps of Quadlin hell, my friend, we've lost the art of conversation. We croak in chorus with what's left of the froggy folk. I intend to have a headache from shame, said Nessarose charmingly. But I knew Elfie when she was a small thing, said Buck. I'm from Rush Margins and Wind Hardings. I must have met you too. Primarily, I preferred to reside at Coywin Grounds, said Nanny. I was a mortal comfort to the Lady Partra, the Throp second descending. But occasionally I visited Rush Margins, so I may have met you when you were young enough to run around without trousers. How do you do? Said Nessarose. The name is Buck, said Buck. This is Nessarose, said Nanny, as if it were too painful for the girl to introduce herself. She was to come up to Shiz next year, but we have learned there's a problem with some Gillicanese minder going loopy. So Nanny is called to step in, and can Nanny leave her suite? You see why not. A sad mystery, we hope for improvement, said Buck. At Crage Hall, Buck witnessed the reunion of the sisters, which was warm and gratifying. Madame Morble had her grammatic thing wheel out tea and brisks for the Throp females and for Nanny, Buck, and Glinda. Buck, who had begun to worry about Glinda's retreat into silence, was relieved to see Glinda cast a hard, appraising eye over the elegant dress of Nessarose. How could it be, he wondered if Glinda was wondering, that two sisters should each be disfigured, and should clothe themselves so unlike? Elphaba wore the humblest of dark frocks. Today she was in a deep purple, almost a black. Nessarose, balanced on a sofa next to Nanny, who assisted by lifting teacups and crumpling buttery bits of crumpet, was in green silks, the colors of moss, emerald, and yellow-green roses. Green Elphaba, sitting on her other side and lending her support between the shoulders as she tilted her head back to sip her tea, looked like a fashion accessory. The whole arrangement is highly unusual, Madame Morble was saying, but we don't have unlimited room to accommodate peculiarities. Alas, we'll leave Miss Elphaba and Miss Galinda. Glinda, is it now? Dear, How novel. We'll leave those two old pals as they are, and we'll set you up, Miss Nessarose, with your nanny in the adjoining room that poor old Alma Clutch had. It's small, but you must think of it as cozy. But when Alma Clutch recovers, asked Glinda. Oh, but my dear, said Madame Morrible, such confidence the young have. Touching, really, she continued in a more steely voice. You have already told me of the long-standing recurrence of this unusual medical condition. I can only assume this has deteriorated into a permanent relapse. She munched a biscuit in her slow, fishy way, her cheeks going in and out like the leather flaps of a bellows. Of course we can all hope. Not much more than that, I'm afraid. And we can pray, Nessarose said. Oh, well, yes, that, said the head. That goes without saying among people of good breeding. Miss Nessarose. Bulk watched Nessarose and Elphaba both blush. Glinda excused herself and went away. The usual pang of panic Bach felt at her departure was softened by knowing he would see her again in life sciences next week, for with the new prohibitions on animal hiring, the colleges had decided to give assembly lectures to all the students from all the colleges at once. Bach would see Glinda at the first coeducation lecture ever held at Shears. He couldn't wait. Though she had changed, she had surely changed. Glinda was changed. She knew it herself. She had come to shiz a vain, silly thing, and she now found herself in a coven of vipers. Maybe it was her own fault. She had invented a nonsense disease for Alma Clutch, and Alma Clutch had come down with it. Was this proof of an inherent talent of sorcery? Glinda opted to specialize in sorcery this year and accepted it as her punishment that Madame Morrible didn't change her roomie as promised. Glinda no longer cared. Beside Dr. Dillamond's death, a lot of other matters now seemed insignificant. But she didn't trust Madame Morrible either. Glinda had told nobody else that stupid and extravagant lie. So now she would no longer allow Madame Morrible so much as a finger-hold into her life. And Glinda still didn't have the nerve to confess her unintentional crime to anyone. While she fretted, Bach, that pesky little flea, kept zizzing around her looking for attention. She was sorry she had let him kiss her. What a mistake. Well, all that was behind her now, that trembling on the edges of social disaster. She had seen the Mrs. Fanet, etc. for what they were, shallow, self-serving snobs, and she would have no more to do with them. So Elphaba, no longer a social liability, had all the potential of becoming an actual friend, if being saddled with this broken doll of a baby sister didn't interfere too much. It was only with prodding that Glinda had gotten Elphaba to talk at all about her sister, so that Glinda might be prepared for Nessarose's arrival and the enlargement of their social circle. She was born at Culwin Grounds when I was about 3, Elphaba had told her. My family had gone back to Culwin Grounds for a short stay. It was one of those times of intense drought. Our father told us later, after our mother had died, that Nessarose's birth had coincided with a temporary resurgence of well water in the vicinity. They'd been doing pagan dances, and there was a human sacrifice. Glinda had stared at Elphaba, who sounded at once unwilling and offended. A friend of theirs, a quadling glass-blower. The crowd, incited by some rabble-rousing fathers and a prophetic clock, fell on him and killed him. A man named Turtleheart. Elphaba had pressed the palms of her hands over the high uppers of her stiff black second-hand shoes and kept her eyes trained on the floor. I think that was why my parents became missionaries to the Quadling people, why they never went back to Culwin Grounds or Munchkinland. But your mother died in childbirth? Said Glinda. How could she have been a missionary? She didn't die for 5 years, said Elphaba, looking at the folds of her dress as if the story were an embarrassment. She died when our younger brother was born. My father named him Shell, after Turtleheart, I think. So Shell and Nessarose and I lived the lives of gypsy children, slopping around from Quadling settlement to settlement with Nanny and our father Frex. He preached, And Nanny taught us and raised us up and kept house such as we ever had, which wasn't much. Meanwhile, the wizard's men began draining the Badlands to get at the ruby deposits. It never worked, of course. They managed to chase the quadlings out and kill them, round them up in settlement camps for their own protection, and starve them. They despoiled the Badlands, raked up the rubies, and left. My father went barmy over it. There never were enough rubies to make it worth the effort. We still have no canal system to run that legendary water from the Vincas all the way across country to Munchkinland, and the drought, after a few promising reprieves, continues unabated. The animals are recalled to the lands of their ancestors, a ploy to give the farmers a sense of control over something anyway. It's a systematic marginalizing of populations, Galinda. That's what the wizard's all about. We were talking about your childhood, said Galinda. Well, that's it. That's all part of it. You can't divorce your particulars from politics, Elphaba. I want to know what Nessarose is like, and shall, said Galinda. Nessarose is a strong-willed semi-invalid, said Elphaba. She's very smart and thinks she is holy. She has inherited my father's taste for religion. She isn't good at taking care of other people because she has never learned how to take care of herself. She can't. My father required me to babysit her through most of my childhood. What she will do when Nanny dies, I don't know. I suppose I'll have to take care of her again. Oh, what a hideous prospect for a life, said Galinda, before she could stop herself. But Elphaba only nodded grimly. I can't agree with you more, she said. As for Shell, continued Galinda, wondering what fresh pain she might tread upon. Male and white and whole, she said. He's now about 10, I guess. He'll stay at home and take care of our father. He is a boy, just as boys are. A little dull, maybe, but he hasn't had the advantages we've had. Which are? Prompted Galinda. Even for a short time, said Elphaba, we had a mother. Giddy, alcoholic, imaginative, uncertain, desperate, brave, stubborn, supportive. A woman, we had her, Milena. Shell had no mother but Nanny, who did her best. And who was your mother's favorite? Said Galinda. Can't tell that, said Elphaba casually. Don't know. Would have been Shell, probably, since he's a boy. But she died without seeing him, so she didn't even get that small consolation. Your father's favorite? Oh, that's easy, said Elphaba, jumping up and finding her books on her shelf, and getting ready to run out and stop the conversation in its tracks. That's Nessarose. You'll see why when you meet her. She'd be anyone's favorite. She skidded out of the room with no more than a brief flurry of green fingers, a goodbye. Galinda wasn't so sure she favored Elphaba's sister. Nessarose seemed so demanding Nanny was overly attentive, and Elphaba kept suggesting adjustments in their living arrangements to make things perfect, hitch the drapes to this angle instead of that, to keep the touch of the sun off Nessarose's pretty skin. Can we have the oil lamp turned up high so Nessarose can read? Shh, no chatting after hours. Nessarose has retired and she is such a light sleeper. Galinda was a bit awed by Nessarose's freaky beauty. Nessarose dressed well, if not extravagantly. She deflected attention from herself, though, by a system of little social tics, the head lowered in a sudden onslaught of devotion, the eyes batting. It was especially moving, and Irritatinko have to wipe away a trickle of tears brought on by some epiphany in Nessarose's rich inner spiritual life, of which bystanders could have no inkling. What did one say? Galinda began to retreat into her studies. Sorcery was being taught by a louche new instructor named Miss Grayling. She had a gushing respect for the subject, but it soon became apparent little natural ability. At its most elemental, a spell is no more than a recipe for change, she would flute at them. But when the chicken she tried to turn into a piece of toast became instead a mess of used coffee grounds cupped in a lettuce leaf, the students all made a mental note never to accept an invitation to dine with her, in the back of the room, creeping with pretend invisibility so that she might observe. Madame Morrible shook her head and clucked. Once or twice she could not stop herself from interfering. No dab hand in the sorcerer's parlor. Ah, she would protest. Yet surely, Miss Grayling, you've omitted the steps to bind and convince? I'm merely asking. Let me try. You know I take a special pleasure in our training of sorceresses. Inevitably, Miss Grayling sat on what was left of a previous demonstration, or dropped her purse, collapsing into a heap of shame and mortification. The girls giggled and didn't feel that they were learning much. Or were they? The benefit of Miss Grayling's clumsiness was that they were not afraid to try for themselves, and she didn't stint at enthusiasm if a student managed to accomplish the day's task. The first time Galinda was able to mask a spool of thread with a spell of invisibility, even for a few seconds. Miss Grayling clapped her hands and jumped up and down and broke a heel off her shoe. It was gratifying and encouraging. Not that I have any objection, said Elphaba one day when she and Galinda, Nessarose, and inevitably Nanny sat under a pearl fruit tree by the Suicide Canal. But I have to wonder, how does the university get away with teaching sorcery when its original charter was so strictly unionist? Well, there isn't anything inherently religious or non-religious about sorcery, said Galinda. Is there? There isn't anything inherently pleasure-facetious about it either. Spells, changings, apparitions. It's all entertainment, said Elphaba. It's theater. Well, it can look like theater, and in the hands of Miss Grayling it often looks like bad theater, admitted Galinda. But the gist of it isn't concerned with application. It's a practical skill, like reading and writing. It's not that you can, it's what you read or write. Or, if you'll excuse the play on words, what you spell. Father disapproved mightily, Nessarose said in the dulcet tones of the unflappably faithful. Father always said that magic was the sleight of hand of the devil. He said pleasure faith was no more than an exercise to distract the masses from the true object of their devotion. That's a unionist talking, said Galinda, not taking offense. A sensible opinion, if what you're up against is charlatans or street performers, but sorcery doesn't have to be that. What about the common witches up in the Glildias? They say that they magic the cows they've imported from Munchkinland so they don't go mooing over the edge of some precipice. Who could ever afford to put a fence on every ledge there? The magic is a local skill, a contribution to community well-being. It doesn't have to supplant religion. It may not have to, said Nessarose, but if it tends to, then have we a duty to be wary of it? Oh, wary? Well, I'm wary of the water I drink. It might be poisoned, said Galinda. That doesn't mean I stop drinking water. Well, I don't even think it's so big an issue, said Elphaba. I think sorcery is trivial. It's concerned with itself mostly. It doesn't lead outward. Galinda concentrated very hard and tried to make Elphaba's leftover sandwich elevate outward over the canal. She only succeeded in exploding the thing in a small combustion of mayonnaise and shredded carrot and chopped olives. Nessarose lost her balance laughing, and Nanny had to prop her up again. Elphaba was covered in bits of food, which she picked off herself and ate, to the disgust and laughter of everyone else. It's all effects, Galinda, she said. There's nothing ontologically interesting about magic. Not that I believe in unionism either, she protested. I'm an atheist and a spiritualist. You say that to shock and scandalize, said Nessarose primly. Galinda, don't listen to a word of her. She always does this, usually to make Father irate. Father's not around, Elphaba reminded her sister. I stand in for him, and I'm offended, said Nessarose. It's all very well to turn your nose up at unionism when you have been given a nose by the unnamed God. That's quite funny, isn't it, Galinda? Childish. She looked spitting angry. Father's not around, said Elphaba again, in a tone that verged on the apologetic. You needn't rush to public defense of his obsessions. Well, you're not a bad sorceress for a beginner, said Elphaba, turning to Galinda. That was a pretty good mess you made of my lunch. Thank you, Galinda said. I didn't mean to pelt you with it, but I am getting better, aren't I? And out in public. A shocking display, Nessarose said. That's exactly what Father would have deplored about sorcery. The allure is all in the surface. I agree it still tastes like olives, Elphaba said, eyeing a clump of black olive in her sleeve, and holding it out on the tip of her finger to her sister's mouth. Taste, Nessa? But Nessarose turned her face away and lost herself in silent prayer. A few days later, Boke managed to catch Elphaba's eye at the break of their life sciences class, and they met up in an alcove off the main corridor. What do you think of this new Dr. Nikidik? He asked. I find it hard to listen, she said, but that's because I still want to hear Dr. Dillamond, and I can't believe he's gone. On her face was a look of gray submission to impossible reality. Well, that's one of the things I'm curious about, he said. You told me all about Dr. Dillamond's breakthrough. Do you know if his lab has been cleared out yet? Maybe there's something there worth finding. You took the notes for him. Couldn't they be the basis of some proposal, or at least some further study? She looked at him with a wiry, strong expression. Do you think I'm not way ahead of you? She asked. Of course I went tramping through there the day his body was found, and before anyone could lace up the door with padlocks and binding spells. Buck, do you take me for a fool? No, I don't take you for a fool, so tell me what you found, he said. His findings are well hidden away, she said, and though there are colossal holes in my training, I am studying it on my own. You mean you're not going to show me? He was shocked. It was never your particular interest, she said. Besides, until there's something to prove. What's the point? I don't think Dr. Dillamond was there yet. I am a Munchkinlander, he answered proudly. Look, Elfie, you've more or less convinced me what the wizard is up to. The confining of animals back onto farms to give the dissatisfied Munchkinlander farmers the impression he's doing something for them, and also to provide forced labor for the sinking of useless new wells. It's vile. But this affects Wind Hardings and the towns that sent me here. I have a right to know what you know. Maybe we can figure it out together, work to make a change. You have too much to lose, she said. I'm going to take this on myself. Take what on? She only shook her head. The less you know, the better, and I mean for your sake. Whoever killed Dr. Dillamond doesn't want his findings made public. What kind of a friend would I be to you if I put you at risk too? What kind of friend would I be to you if I didn't insist? He retorted, but she wouldn't tell him. When he sat next to her during the rest of the class and passed her little notes, she ignored them all. Later, he thought that they might have developed a genuine impasse. In their friendship, had the odd attack on the newcomer not occurred during that very session, Dr. Nicky Dick had been lecturing on the life force, entwining around each wrist the two separate tendrils of his long, straggly beard. He spoke in falling tones so that only the first half of each sentence made it to the back of the room. Hardly a single student was following. When Dr. Biological Intention, only the students in the front row sat up and opened their eyes. For Boke and Elphaba and everyone else, the patter ran a little sauce for the soup, mumble, mumble, as if creation were an unconcluded mumble, 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 notwithstanding the obligations of all sentient mumble, mumble, mumble. And so as a little exercise to make those nodding off in the back of the mumble, 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 behold a little mundane miracle, courtesy of mumble, mumble, mumble. A frisson of excitement had woken everyone up. The doctor uncorked the smoky bottle and made a jerky movement. They could all see a small puff of dust, like an effervescence of talcum powder, jostle itself in a swimming plume in the air above the neck of the bottle. The doctor rode his hands a couple of times to start the air currents eddying upward. Keeping some rare sort of spatial coherence, the plume began to migrate upward and over. And the oohs that the students were inclined to make were all postponed. Dr. Nikitic held a finger out to them to shush them, and they could tell why. A vast intake of breath would change the pattern of air currents and divert the floating musk of powder. But the students began to smile despite themselves. Above the stage, amid the standard ceremonial stag's horns and brass trumpets on braid, hung 4 oil portraits of the founding fathers of Ozma Towers. In their ancient garb and serious expressions, they looked down on today's students. If this biological intention were to be applied to one of the founding fathers, what would he say? Seeing men and women students together in the great hail? What would he have to say about anything? It was a grand moment of anticipation. But when a door to the side of the stage opened, the mechanics of the air currents were disturbed. A student looked in, puzzled. A new student, oddly dressed in suede leggings and a white cotton shirt with a pattern of blue diamonds tattooed on the dark skin of his face and hands. No one had seen him before, or anyone like him. Buck clutched Elphaba's hand tightly and whispered, "Look!" A winkle. And so it seemed, a student from the Vincus in strange ceremonial garb coming late for class, opening the wrong door, confused and apologetic, but the door had shut behind him and locked from this side, and there were no nearby seats available in the front rows. So he dropped where he was and sat with his back against the door, hoping, no doubt, to look inconspicuous. "Drat and damn, the thing's been shabbed off course," said Dr. Nikitic. "You fool! Why don't you come to class on time?" The shining mist, about the size of a bouquet of flowers, had veered upward in a draft, and it bypassed the ranks of long dead dignitaries waiting an unexpected chance to speak again. Instead, it cloaked one of the racks of antlers, seeming for a few moments to hang itself on the twisting prongs. "Well, I can scarcely hope to hear a word of wisdom from them, and I refuse to waste any more of this precious commodity on classroom demonstrations," said Dr. Nikitic. "The research is still incomplete, and I had thought that mumble, mumble, mumble. Let you discover for yourselves, if mumble, mumble, mumble. I should hardly wish to prejudice your mumble." The antlers suddenly took a convulsive twist on the wall and wrenched themselves out of the oaken paneling. They tumbled and shattered to the floor, to the shrieking and laughing of the students, especially because for a minute Dr. Nikitic didn't know what the uproar was about. He turned around in time to see the antlers right themselves and wait, quivering, twitching, on the dais, like a fighting cock all nastied up and ready to go into the ring. "Oh, well, don't look at me," said Dr. Nikitic, collecting his books. "I didn't ask for anything from you. Blame that one if you must." And he casually pointed at the Vincus student, who was cowering so wide-eyed that the more cynical of the older students began to suspect this was all. The antlers stood on their points and skittered crab-like across the stage as the students rose in. A common scream, the antlers scrabbled up the body of the Vincus boy and pinned him against the locked door. One wing of the rack caught him by the neck, shackling him in its V-yoke, and the other reared back in the air to stab him in the face. Dr. Nikitic tried to move fast and fell to his arthritic knees, but before he could right himself, 2 boys were up on the stage, out of the front row, grabbing the antlers and wrestling them to the ground. The Vincus boy shrieked in a foreign tongue. "That's Crope and Tibbet," said Bach, jouncing Elphaba in the shoulder. "Look!" The sorcery students were all jumping on their seats and trying to lob spells at the murderous antlers, and Crope and Tibbet found their grips and lost them and found them again, until at last they succeeded in breaking off one driving tine, then another, and the pieces, still twitching, fell to the stage floor without further momentum. "Oh, the poor guy," said Buck, for the Vincus student had slumped down and was volubly weeping behind his blue diamonded hands. "I never saw a student from the Vincus before. What an awful welcome to shiz. The attack on the Vinca student provoked gossip and speculation. In sorcery the next day, Galinda asked Miss Grayling to explain something. How could Dr. Nicodick's extract of biological intention, or whatever it was, how could it fall under the heading of life sciences when it behaved like a master spell? What really is the difference between science and sorcery? Ah, said Miss Grayling, choosing this moment to apply herself to the care of her hair. Science, my dears, is the systematic dissection of nature to reduce it to working parts that more or less obey universal laws. Sorcery moves in the opposite direction. It doesn't rend, it repairs. It is synthesis rather than analysis. It builds anew rather than revealing the old. In the hands of someone truly skilled, at this she jabbed herself with a hairpin and yelped, "It is art." And one might in fact call it the superior or the finest art. It bypasses the fine arts of painting and drama and recitation. It doesn't pose or represent the world. It becomes a very noble calling. She began to weep softly with the force of her own rhetoric. Can there be a higher desire than to change the world, not to draw utopian blueprints, but really to order change? To revise the misshapen, reshape the mistaken, to justify the margins of this ragged era of a universe? Through sorcery to survive? At tea time, still awed and amused, Galinda reported Miss Grayling's little heartfelt speech to the two Throp sisters. Nessarose said, "Only the unnamed God creates, Galinda. If Miss Grayling confuses sorcery with creation, she is in grave danger of corrupting your morals." "Well," said Galinda, thinking of Amma Clutch on the bed of mental pain Galinda had once imagined for her, "my morals aren't in the greatest shape to start out with, Nessa." "Then if sorcery is to be helpful at all, it must be in reconstructing your character," said Nessarose firmly. "If you apply yourself in that direction, I suspect it will be all right in the end. Now use your talent at sorcery, don't be used by it." Galinda suspected that Nessarose might develop a knack for being witheringly superior. She winced in advance, even while taking Nessarose's suggestion to heart. But Elphaba said, "Galinda, that was a good question. I wish Miss Grayling had answered it. That little nightmare with the antlers looked more like magic than science to me, too. The poor Vincus fellow." "Suppose we ask Dr. Nicky Dick next week?" "Whoever would have the courage to do that?" cried Galinda. "Miss Grayling is at least ridiculous. Dr. Nicodick, with that lovable, bumbling, mumbling, incoherent way he's so distinguished." At the Life Sciences lecture the following week, all eyes were on the new Vincus boy. He arrived early and settled himself in the balcony, about as far from the lectern as he could get. Bach had the suspicion of nomads, all settled farmers, possessed. But Bach had to admit that the expression in the new boy's eyes was intelligent. Avaric, sliding into the seat next to Bach, said, "He's a prince, they say. A prince without a purse or a throne. A pauper noble. In his particular tribe, I mean. He stays at Ozma Towers, and his name is Fierro. He's a real winkle, full blood. Wonder what he makes of civilization? If that was civilization last week, he must long for his own barbaric kind," said Elphaba from the seat on the other side of Buck. "What's he wearing such silly paint for?" Said Avaric, "He only draws attention to himself." "What a thing to say," said Elphaba. "If you ask me, that's a shitty opinion." "Oh, please," said Bach. "Let's just shut up." "I forgot, Elfie. Skin is your issue, too," said Avaric. "Oh, leave me out of this," she said. "We just had lunch, and you give me dyspepsia. Avaric, you and the beans we had at lunch." "I'm changing my seat," warned Bach. But Dr. Nikita came in just then, and the class rose to its feet in routine respect, then settled back noisily, chummily, chattering. For a few minutes, Elphaba waved her hand to get the doctor's attention, but she was sitting too far back and he was burbling on about something else. She finally leaned over to Bach and said, "At the recess, I'll change my seat and go forward so he can see me." Then the class watched as Dr. Nikitic finished his inaudible preamble and beckoned a student to open the same door at the side of the stage that Fierro had stumbled through the previous week. In came a boy from 3 Queens, rolling a table like a tea tray. On it, crouched as if to make itself as small as possible, was a lion cub. Even from the balcony, they could sense the terror of the beast. Its tail, a little whip the color of mashed peanuts, lashed back and forth, and its shoulders hunched. It had no mane to speak of yet. It was too tiny, but the tawny head twisted this way and that, as if counting the threats. It opened its mouth in a little terrified yawp, the infant form of an adult roar. All over the room, hearts melted, and people said, "Ah!" "Hardly more than a kitten," said Dr. Nikitic. "I had thought to call it purr, but it shivers more often than it purrs, so I call it burr instead." The creature looked at Dr. Nikitic and removed itself to the far edge of the trolley.
"The question of the morning is this," said Dr. Nikitic,
picking up from the somewhat skewed interests of Doctor Dillamond, who mumble. "Who can tell me if this is an animal or an animal?" Elphaba didn't wait to be called on. She stood up in the balcony and launched her answer out in a clear, strong voice. "Dr. Nikitic, the question you asked was who can tell if this is an animal or an animal. It seems to me the answer is that its mother can. Where is its mother?" A buzz of amusement. "Caught in a swamp of syntactical semantics, I see," said the doctor merrily. He spoke louder, as if having only now realized that there was a balcony in the hall. "Well done, miss. Let me rephrase the question. Will someone here venture a hypothesis as to the nature of this specimen, and give a reason for such an assessment? We see before us a beast at a tender age, long before any such beast could command language if language were part of its makeup. Before language, assuming language, is this still an animal?" "I repeat my question, doctor," sang out Elphaba. "This is a very young cub. Where is its mother? Why is it taken from its mother at such an early age? How even can it feed?" "Those are impertinent questions to the academic issue at hand," said the doctor. "Still, the youthful heart bleeds easily. The mother, shall we say, died in a sadly timed explosion. Let us presume for the sake of argument that there was no way of telling whether the mother was a lioness or a lioness. After all, as you may have heard, some animals are going back to the wild to escape the—" Elphaba sat down nonplussed. "It doesn't seem right to me," she said to Bach and Avaric, "for the sake of a science lesson to drag a cub in here without its mother. Look how terrified it is. It is shivering, and it can't be cold." Other students began to venture opinions, but the doctor shot them down one by one. The point being, apparently, that without language or contextual clues, at its infant stages, a beast was not clearly animal or animal. "This has a political implication," said Elphaba loudly. "I thought this was life sciences, not current events." Bach and Avaric shushed her. She was getting a terrible reputation as a loudmouth. The doctor dragged the episode out long after everyone had digested the point, but finally he turned and said, "Now do you think that if we could cauterize that part of the brain that develops language, we could eliminate the notion of pain and thus its existence?" Early tests on this little torn lion show interesting results. He had picked up a small hammer with a rubber head and a syringe. The beast drew itself up and hissed, and then backed up and fell on the floor and streaked toward the door, which had closed and locked from this side as it had the previous week. But it wasn't only Elphaba who was on her feet yelling. Half a dozen students were shouting at the doctor, "Pain! Eliminate pain! Look at the thing, it's terrified. It already gets pain. Don't do that. What are you, crazy? The doctor paused, visibly tightening his grip on the mallet. I will not preside over such shocking refusal to learn, he said, affronted. You are leaping to harebrained conclusions based on sentiment and no observation. Bring the beast here. Bring it back. Young lady, I insist. I shall be quite cross. But two girls from Briscoe Hall disobeyed and ran out of the room carrying the clawing lion club in an apron between them. The room collapsed in an uproar, and Dr. Nicky stalked off the stage. Elphaba turned to Bach and said, Well, I guess I don't get to ask Glinda's good question about the difference between science and sorcery, do I? We were definitely headed down a different path today, but her voice was shaking. You felt for that beast, didn't you? Bach was touched. Elfie, you're trembling. I don't mean this in an insulting way, but you've nearly gone white with passion. Come on, let's sneak out and get a tea at the cafe at Railway Square for old time's sake. Perhaps every accidental cluster of people has a short period of grace. In between the initial shyness and prejudice on the one hand, and eventual repugnance and betrayal on the other. For Bach it seemed that his summer obsession with the then Galinda made sense, if only to usher in this following, more mature comfort with a circle of friends who had begun to feel inevitably and permanently connected. The boys still weren't allowed access to Crage Hall, nor the girls to the boys' schools. But the city center area of Shiz became an extension of the parlors and lecture halls in which they were allowed to mingle. On a midweek afternoon, on a weekend morning, they would meet by the canal with a bottle of wine, or in a cafe or student watering hole, or they would walk about and discuss the fine points of Shiz architecture, or they would laugh about the excesses of their teachers. Bach and Avaric, Elphaba and Nessarose, with Nanny, Galinda, and sometimes Fanny and Shinshin and Mila, and sometimes Crope and Tibbet, and Crope brought Fiyero along and introduced him, which frosted Tibbet for a week or so until the evening that Fiyero said, in his shy, formal way, Of course, I have been married for some time. We marry young in the Vincas. The others were agog at the notion, and felt juvenile, patience with her religious rantings. Crope's and Tibbet's stream of saucy remarks got them dumped in the canal more than once. But Bach was relieved to find that his crush on Glinda was lifting somewhat. She sat on the edge of the picnic blanket with a look of self-reliance, and she diverted conversation away from herself. He had loved the girl who had loved the glamour in herself, and that girl seemed to have disappeared. But he was happy to have Glinda as a friend. Well, in a nutshell, he had loved Galinda, and this now was Glinda. Someone he could no longer quite figure out. Case closed. It was a charm circle. All the girls steered clear of Madame Morrible while they could. One cold evening, however, Grammatic came hunting for the Throp sisters. Nammy huffed and wound the strings of a fresh apron around her waist, and prodded Nessarose and Elphaba downstairs toward the parlor of the head. "I hate that Grammatic thing," said Nessarose. "However does it work anyway? Is it clockwork or is it magic, or some combination of the two?" "I always imagined a bit of nonsense, that there was a dwarf inside, or an acrobatic family of elves, each working a limb," said Elphaba. "Whenever Grammatic comes around, my hand gets a strange hunger for a hammer." "I can't imagine," Nessarose said. "Hand hunger, I mean." "Hush, you two, the thing has ears," Nanny said. Madame Morrible was glancing through the financial papers, making a few marks in the margin before she deigned to acknowledge her students. "This won't take but a moment," she said. "I've had a letter from your dear father, and a package for you. I thought it kindest to deliver the news myself." "News?" said Nessarose, blanching. "He could have written to us as well as to you," said Elphaba. Madame Morrible ignored her. He writes to ask of Nessarose's health and progress, and to tell you both that he is going to undertake a fast and penance for the return of Ozma to Betrayals. "Oh, the blessed little girl," said Nanny, warming to one of her favorite subjects when the wizard took over the palace all those years ago and he had the Ozma regent jailed. "We all thought that the sainted Ozma child would call down disaster upon the wizard's head. But they say she's been spirited away and frozen in a cave, like Lolina. Has Frexpa got the metal to melt her? Is now her time to return?" "Please," said Madame Morrible to the sisters, with a sour glance at Nanny. "I haven't asked you here so that your Nanny could discuss this contemporary apocrypha, nor to slander our glorious wizard. It was a peaceful transition of power. That the Ozma regent's health failed while under house arrest was a mere coincidence, nothing more. As to the power of your father to raise the missing royal child from some unsubstantiated state of somnolence, well, you've as much as admitted to me that your father is erratic, if not mad. I can only wish him health in his endeavors, but I feel it my duty to point out to you girls that we do not smile on seditious attitudes at Crage Hall. I hope you have not imported your father's royalist yearnings into the dormitories here. We assign ourselves to the unnamed god, not to the wizard, nor to any possible remnant of the royal family," Nessarose said proudly. "I have no feeling on the matter at all," muttered Elphaba, "except that father loves lost causes." "Very well," said the head, "as it should be. Now I have had a package for you." She handed it to Elphaba, but added, "It is for Nessarose, I think." "Open it, Elphie, please," said Nessarose. Nanny leaned forward to look. Elphaba undid the cord and opened the wooden box. From a pile of ash shavings she withdrew a shoe and then another. Were they silver or blue or now red, lacquered with a candy shell? Brilliance of polish? It was hard to tell, and it didn't matter. The effect was dazzling. Even Madame Morrible gasped at their splendor. The surface of the shoes seemed to pulse with hundreds of reflections and refractions. In the firelight, it was like looking at boiling corpuscles of blood under a magnifying glass. "He writes that he bought them for you from some toothless tinkerwoman outside Ovals," said Madame Morrible, "and that he dressed them up with silver glass beads that he made himself, that someone had taught him to make." "Turtle heart," said Nanny darkly, and Madame Morrible flipped the letter over, squinting. "He says he had hoped to give you something special before you left for university, but in the sudden circumstances of Amma Clutch's sickness, blah, 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 he was unprepared. So now he sends them to his Nessarose to keep her beautiful feet warm and dry and beautiful, and he sends them with his love." Elphaba drove her fingers through the curlicues of shavings. There was nothing else in the box, nothing for her. "Aren't they gorgeous?" Nessarose exclaimed. "Elphie, fix them on my feet, would you please? Oh, how they sparkle!" Elphaba went on her knees before her sister. Nessarose sat as regal as any Ozma, spine erect and face glowing. Elphaba lifted her sister's feet and slipped off the common house slippers and replaced them with the dazzling shoes. "How thoughtful he is," said Nessarose. "Good thing you can stand on your own 2 feet, you," muttered Nanny to Elphaba, and put her old hand patronizingly on Elphaba's shoulder blades, but Elphaba shrugged it away. "They're just gorgeous," said Elphaba thickly. "Nessarose, they're made for you. They fit like a dream." "Oh, Elphie, don't be cross," Nessarose said, looking down at her feet. "Don't ruin my small happiness with resentment, will you? He knows you don't need this kind of thing." "Of course not," said Elphaba. "Of course I don't." That evening the friends risked breaking curfew by ordering another bottle of wine. Nanny tutted and fretted, but as she kept downing her portion as neatly as anyone else, she was overruled. Fierro told the story of how he had been married at the age of 7 to a girl from a neighboring tribe. They all gawped at his apparent lack of shame. He had only seen his bride once, by accident, when they were both about 9. I won't really take up with her until we are 20, and I'm now only 18, he added, with the relief of imagining he might still be as virginal as the rest of them. They ordered yet another bottle of wine. The candles guttered, a small autumnal rain fell. Though the room was dry, Elphaba drew her cloak about her as if anticipating the walk home. She had gotten over the sting of being overlooked by Frex. She and Nessarose began to tell funny stories about their father, as if to prove to themselves and to everyone else that nothing was amiss. Nessarose, who wasn't much of a drinker, allowed herself to laugh. Despite my appearance, or maybe because of it, he always called me his beautiful pet, she said, alluding to her lack of arms for the first time in public. He would say, "Come here, my pet, and let me give you a piece of apple." And I would walk over as best I could, tilting and tottering if Nanny or Elfie or Mother wasn't around to support me, and fall into his lap. And lean up smiling, and he'd drop small pieces of fruit into my mouth. "What did he call you, Liffey?" asked Glinda. "He called her Fabala," interrupted Nessarose. At home only," Elphaba said. "True, you are your father's little Fabala," crooned Nanny, almost to herself just outside the... "He never called me pet," said Elphaba, raising her glass to her sister. "But we all know he told the truth, as Nessarose is the pet in the family. Hence those splendid shoes." Nessarose blushed and accepted a toast. "Ah, but while I had his attention because of my condition, you captured his heart when you sang," she said. "Captured his heart? Ha! You mean I performed a necessary function." But the others said to Elphaba, "Oh, do you sing? Well then, sing, you must." Another bottle, another glass. Push back the chair, and before we leave for the night, you must sing. Go on. "Only if the others will," said Elphaba, bossily. "Bach, some Munchkinland, a spinel, a Avaric, a Gilliganese ballad, Glinda, Nanny, a lullaby?" "We know a dirty round. We'll go next if you go," said Cropin-Tibbet. "And I will sing a Vinca's hunting chant," said Fierro. Everyone chortled with pleasure and clapped him on the back. So then Elphaba had to stand, push her chair aside, clear her throat, and sound a note into her cupped hands and start. As if she was singing for her father again after all. This time, the bar mother slapped her rag at some noisy older men to shush them, and the dart players dropped their hands to their sides. The room quieted down. Elphaba made up a little song on the spot, a song of longing and otherness, of far-aways and future days. Strangers closed their eyes to listen. Bach did too. Elphaba had an okay voice. He saw the imaginary place she conjured up, a land where injustice and common cruelty and despotic rule and the beggaring fist of drought didn't work together to hold everyone by the neck. No, he wasn't giving her credit. Elphaba had a good voice. It was controlled and feeling and not histrionic. He listened through to the end, and the song faded into the hush of a respectful pub. Later he thought the melody faded like a rainbow after a storm, or like winds calming down at last, and what was left was calm and possibility and relief. "You next, you promised," cried Elphaba, pointing at Fierro, but nobody would sing again because she had done so well. Nessarose nodded to Nanny to wipe a tear from the corner of her eye. "Elphaba says she's not religious, but see how feelingly she sings of the afterlife," said Nessarose, and for once no one was inclined to argue. Early one morning, when the world was hoary with rime frost, Grammatic arrived with a note. For Glinda. Alma Clutch, it seemed, was on her way out. Glinda and her roommates hurried to the infirmary. The head met them there and led them to a windowless alcove. Alma Clutch was thrashing about in the bed and talking to the pillowcase. Don't put up with me, she was saying wildly, for what will I ever do for you? I will abuse your good nature, ducky, and rest my oily locks upon your fine close weave, and I will be picking with my teeth at your lacy appliqued edge. You are a stupid nuisance to allow it, I say. I don't care about notions of service. It's all bunk, I tell you, bunk. I'm a clutch. It's me, said Galinda. Listen, dear. It's me. It's your little Galinda. Amma Clutch turned her head from side to side. Your protest is insulting to your forebears, she went on, rolling her eyes toward the pillowcase again. Those cotton plants on the banks of Restwater didn't allow themselves to be harvested so you could lie down like a mat and let any filthy person slobber all over. You would night drool. It don't make a lick of sense. Amma, Glinda wept. Please, you're raving. Aha, I see you have nothing to say to that, said Amma Clutch with satisfaction. Come back, Amma, come back one more time before you go. Oh, sweet Leline, this is dreadful, Nanny said. Darlings, if I ever get like this, poison me, will you? She's going, I can see it, Elphaba said. I saw it enough in Quadling country. I know the signs. Glinda, say what you need to say quickly. Madam Morrible, may I have privacy? Glinda said, I will stay by your side and support you. It's my duty to my girls, said the head, settling her ham-like hands determinedly on her waist. But Elphaba and Nanny got up and elbowed her out of the alcove, down the hall and through the door and closed it and locked it. Nanny clucked all the while, saying, Now, isn't that nice of you, Madam Head, but no need. No need at all. Glinda gripped Amma Clutch's hand. Beads of white sweat were forming like potato water on the servant's forehead. She struggled to pull her hand away, but her strength was going. Amma Clutch, you're dying, Glinda said, and it's my fault. Oh, stop, Elphaba said. It is, Glinda said fiercely. It is. I'm not arguing that, said Elphaba. I just mean cut yourself out of the conversation. This is her death, not your interview with the unnamed god. Come on. Do something. Glinda grabbed the hands, both hands even tighter. I am going to magic you back, she said between gritted teeth. Amma Clutch. You do as I say. I'm still your employer and your better, and you have to obey me. Now listen to this spell and behave yourself. The Amma's teeth gnashed, the eyes rolled, and the chin twisted knobbily, as if trying to impale some invisible demon in the air above her bed. Glinda's eyes shut and her jaw worked, and a thread of sound, syllables incoherent even to herself, came spooling out from her blanched lips. Hope you don't explode her like a sandwich, muttered Elphaba. Glinda ignored this. She hummed and worked, she rocked and panted. Amma Clutch's eyelids moved so frantically over the closed eyes that it looked as if her eye sockets were chewing her own eyes. Magicordium sensus ovinda clanks, Glinda concluded out loud. And if that doesn't do it, I give up. Even the smells and bells of a full kit wouldn't help, I think. On the straw pallet, Amma Clutch fell back. A little blood ran from the outer edge of each eye, but the wild turning motion of the focus had shuttered itself down. Oh, my dear, she murmured. So you're all right then, or am I dead now? Not yet, said Glinda. Yes, dear Amma. Yes, I'm fine. But, sweetheart, I think you're going. Of course I am. The wind is here. Can't you hear it? Amma Clutch said. No matter. Oh, there's Elfie, too. Goodbye, my ducks. Stay out of the wind until the time is right, or you'll be blown in the wrong direction. Glinda said, Amma Clutch, I have something to say to you. I have to make my apology. But Elphaba leaned forward, cutting Glinda off from Amma Clutch's line of sight, and said, Amma Clutch, before you go, tell us who killed Doctor Dillamond. Surely you know that, Amma Clutch said. Make us sure, Elphaba said. Well, I saw it, nearly. It had just happened and the knife was still there. Amma Clutch worked for breath, smeared with blood that hadn't had a chance to dry. What did you see? This is important. I saw the knife in the air. I saw the wind come to take Dr. Dillamond away. I saw the clockwork turn and the goat's time stop. It was grammatic, wasn't it? Elphaba murmured, trying to get the old woman to speak the words. Well, that's what I'm saying, Ducky, said Amma Clutch. And did it see you? Did it turn on you? Cried Glinda. Did that make you ill, Amma Clutch? It was my time to be ill, said Amma Clutch gently, so I couldn't complain. And it is my time to die. So leave me be. Just hold my hand, dear. But the fault is mine, began Glinda. You would do me more good if you hushed, sweet Galinda, my duck, said Amma Clutch gently and patted Glinda's hand. Then she closed her eyes and breathed in and out a couple of times. They sat there in a silence that seemed peculiarly servant-class Gillikinese, though it was hard later on to explain why. Outside, Madame Morrible moved up and down the floorboards, pacing. Then they imagined they heard a wind, or an echo of a wind, and Amma Clutch was gone, and the overly subordinate pillowcase took a small spill of human juice from the edge of her slackened mouth. The funeral was modest, a love her aunt, shove her affair. Glinda's close friends attended, filling 2 pews, and in the second tier of the chapel a flock of almas made a professional coterie. The rest of the chapel was empty. After the corpse in its winding sheet slid along the oiled chute to the furnace, the mourners and colleagues retired to Madame Marble's private parlor, where she proved to have sanctioned no expense in the refreshments. The tea was ancient stock, stale as sawdust, the biscuits were hard, and there was no saffron cream or Tomorna marmalade, Glinda said reprovingly to the head. Not even a small bowl of cream, and Madame Marble answered, My girl, I tried to protect my charges from the worst of the food shortages by judicious shopping and by going without myself, but I am not wholly responsible for your ignorance. If only people would obey the wizard absolutely, there would be abundance. Don't you realize that conditions verge on famine and cows are dying of starvation 200 miles from here? This makes saffron cream very dear in the market. Glinda began to move away, but Madame Marble reached out a raft of cushiony, bulbous, bejeweled fingers. The touch made Glinda's blood run cold. I should like to see you and Miss Nessarose and Miss Elphaba, said the head. After the guests leave, please wait behind. We're nabbed for a lecture, whispered Glinda to the Throp sisters. We have to be yelled. Not a word about what Amma Clutch said or that she came back, said Elphaba urgently. Got that, Nessa? Nanny? They all nodded. Bach and Avaric, making their goodbyes, said that the group was reconvening at the pub in the Regent's Parade. The girls agreed to meet them there after their interview with the head. They would manage a more honest memorial service for Amma Clutch at the Peach and Kidneys. When the small crowd had dispersed, only Grammatic clearing away the cups and crumbs. Madame Morrible herself banked up the fire, a gesture of chumminess lost on no one, and sent Grammatic away. Later, thingy, she said. Later, go lubricate yourself in some closet somewhere. Grammatic wheeled away with, if it was possible, an offended air. Elphaba had to repress an urge to kick it with the tip of her stout black walking boot. You too, Nanny, Madame Morrible said. A little break from your labors? Oh, no, Nanny said. Nanny doesn't leave her Nessa. Yes, Nanny does. Her sister is perfectly capable of caring for her, said the head. Aren't you? Miss Elphaba, the very soul of charity. Elphaba opened her mouth. The word soul always provoked her. Glinda knew, but closed it again. She made a wincing nod toward the door. Without a word, Nanny got up to leave, but before the door closed behind her, Nanny said, It's not my place to complain, but really, no cream? At a funeral? Criticism of servants, or a bid for sympathy? The head rallied herself by arranging her skirts and the vents and braids of her smart parlor jacket. In orangey copper sequins, she looked like a huge upholstered, upended goldfish goddess. However did she get to behead? Glinda wondered. Now that Amma Clutch has gone to ash, we must move bravely on, Madame Mambo began. My girls, may I first ask you to recount the sad story of her last words? It is essential therapy in your recovery from grief. The girls didn't look at one another. Glinda, in this situation the spokesperson, took a breath and said, "Oh, she spewed nonsense to the last." "No surprise, the dotty old thing," said Madame Marble. "But what nonsense?" "We couldn't make it out," said Glinda. "I had wondered if she talked about the death of the goat." Glinda said, "Oh, the goat? Well, I could hardly tell. I suspected that, in her deranged condition, she might return to that critical moment. The dying often try to make sense at the last possible moment of the puzzles of their lives. Useless effort, of course. No doubt Amma Clutch was puzzled by what she came across. The goat's body, the blood, and grammatic." "Oh," said Glinda faintly. The sisters beside her were careful not to stir. "That terrible morning I was up early at my spiritual meditations, and I noticed the light in Doctor Dillamond's lab. So I sent Grammatic over with a cheering pot of tea for the old goat. Grammatic found the animal slumped over a broken lens. He'd apparently stumbled and severed his own jugular vein. Such a sad accident, born of academic zeal, not to say hubris and a pitiful lack of common sense. Rest? We all need rest. The brightest of us need our rest." Grammatic in its confusion felt for a pulse. None to be found, and I surmise that is just when Amma Clutch arrived. To see dear Grammatic splashed with the spurts of a strong circulatory pulse. Amma Clutch arrived out of nowhere and none of her business. I might add, but let's not malign the dead, shall we? Glinda gulped back new tears and did not mention that Amma Clutch had mentioned seeing something unusual the evening before and had wandered out to check. I did always think that the shock of all that blood might have been the final straw that sent Amma Clutch pitching back into her ailment. Incidentally, you see why I dismissed Grammatic just now. It's still very sensitive and suspects, I believe, that Amma Clutch thought it responsible for the goat's slaughter. Glinda said waveringly, "Madame Marble, you should know that Amma Clutch had never suffered such a disease as I described to you. I invented it, but I didn't assign it. I didn't commit it to her or her to it." Elphaba looked at Madame Marble steadily, keeping her interest modest. Nessarose's eyelashes fluttered. If Madame Marble knew Glinda's news already, her face didn't give her away. She looked as placid as a tethered rowboat. "Well, this only lends weight to my observations," she allowed. "There is an imaginative, even a prophetic power in your pointed little society skull, Miss Glinda." The head stood, her skirts rustling, whined through a field of wheat. "What I say now I say in strictest confidence. I expect my girls to obey my command. Are we agreed?" She seemed to take their stunned silence as assent. She looked down on them. "That's why she seems so like a fish," Glinda suddenly thought. "She hardly ever blinks." "By an authority vested in me that is too high to be named, I have been charged with a crucial task," said the head. "A task essential to the internal security of Oz. I have been working to fulfill this task for some years, and the time is right, and the goods are at my disposal." She scrutinized them. They were the goods. "You will not repeat what you hear in this room," she said. "You will not want to, you will not choose to, and you will not be able to. I am wrapping each one of you in a binding cocoon as regards this very sensitive material. No," she held up a hand at Elphaba's protest. "No, you have no right to object. The deed is already done, and you must listen and be open to what I say." Glinda tried to examine herself to see if she felt wrapped or bound or spell chilled. but she only felt frightened and young, which may be close to the same thing. She glanced at the sisters. Nessarose in her dazzling shoes was back in her chair, nostrils dilating in fright or excitement. Elphaba, on the other hand, looked as stolid and cross as usual. You live in a little womb here, a tight little nest, girl with girl. Oh, I know you have your silly boys on the edge, forgettable things. They're good for one thing only and not even reliable at that. But I digress. I must say that you know little or nothing of the state of the nation today. You have no sense of the pitch of unrest to which things have mounted, setting communities on edge, ethnic groups against one another, bankers against farmers, and factories against shopkeepers. Oz is a seething volcano threatening to erupt and burn us in its own poisonous pus. Our wizard seems strong enough. Ah, hut is he? Is he really? He has a grasp of internal politics. He's no slouch at negotiating rates of exchange with the bloodsuckers of AV or Jemico or Fleon. He rules the Emerald City with an industry and an ability that the decaying knob-jawed Ozma line never dreamed of. Without him, we'd have been swept away in firestorm years ago. We can but be grateful. A strong fist does wonders in a rotten situation. Walk softly, but carry a bit stick. I see I offend. Well, a man is always good for the public face of power, no? Yes, but things are not always as they seem. And it has been clear for some time that the wizard's bag of tricks would not do forever. There are bound to be popular uprisings, the stupid, senseless kind, in which strong, dumb people enjoy getting killed for the sake of political changes that'll be rolled back within the decade. Adds such meaning to meaningless lives, don't you think? One can't imagine any other reason for it. At any rate, the wizard needs some agents. He requires a few generals in the long run. Some people with managing skills, some people with gumption. In a word, women. I have called you 3 girls in here. You are not women yet, but the moment is closing in on you faster than you might think. Despite my opinion as to your behavior, I have had to single you out. There is more in each one of you that meets the eye. Miss Nessarose being the newest, you are the most hidden to me, but once you outgrow that fetching habit of faith, you will display a ferocious authority. Your bodily disorder is of no significance here. Miss Elphaba, you are an isolate, and even in my binding spell, you sit there stewing in scorn of every word I say. This is evidence of great internal power and force of will, something I deeply respect even when marshaled against me. You have shown no sign of interest in sorcery, and I don't claim you have any natural aptitude. But your splendid lone wolf spit and spirit can be harnessed, oh yes it can, and you needn't live a life of unfulfilled rage. And, Miss Galinda, you have surprised yourself with the talents at sorcery you possess. I knew you would. I had hoped your inclinations might rub off on Miss Elphaba, but that they haven't is only firmer proof of Miss Elphaba's iron character. I see in your eyes you all question my methods. You think, somewhat wildly, did horrible Morrible cause that nail to pierce my Alma Clutch's foot, making me have to room with Elphaba? Did she cause Alma Clutch to come downstairs and find the dead goat, the better to get her out of the way, and require Nanny, and thus Nessarose, to show up on the scene? How flattering that you even imagine I have such power. The head paused and came near to blushing, which in her was something like the separating of cream on a flame set too high. I am a handmaiden at the service of superiors, she continued, and my special talent is to encourage talent. In my own small way, I have been called to a vocation of education, and here I make my little contributions to history. Now to be specific, I want you to consider your futures. I would like to name you, to baptize you as it were, as a trio of adepts. In the long run, I would like to assign you behind the scenes ministerial duties in different parts of the country. I am empowered to do this, remember, by those whose bootstraps I am not worthy to lick. But she looked smug, as if she thought herself quite worthy enough indeed of attention from these mysterious forces. Let us say you will be secret partners of the highest level of government. You will be anonymous ambassadors of peace, helping to restrain the unruly element among our less civilized populations. Nothing is decided yet, of course, and you do have a say in the matter. Say to me, and not to each other nor anyone else as the spell goes, but I would like you to think about it. I need, eventually, to place an adept in Gillikin somewhere. Miss Galinda, with your middle-range social position and your transparent ambitions, you can slime your way into ballrooms of Margreaves and still be at home in the pigsties. Oh, don't squirm so. Your good blood is only on one side, and it's not a terribly refined strain anyway. The adept of Gillikin, Miss Galinda? Does it appeal? Galinda could only listen. Miss Elphaba, said Madame Marble, full of the teenage scorn of inherited position, you are nonetheless the Throp third descending, and your great-grandfather, the eminent Throp, is in his dotage. One day you will inherit what is left of Colwyn grounds, that pretentious pile in Nest Hardings, and you could manage to be the adept of Munchkinland. Your unfortunate skin condition notwithstanding, indeed perhaps because of it, you have developed a feistiness and an iconoclasm that is just faintly appealing when it doesn't nauseate. It will come in service, believe me. And Miss Nessarose, she went on, having grown up in Quadling Country, you will want to return there with Nanny. The social situation in Quadling Country is such a mess, what with the decimation of the squelchy froglet population, but it may come back in small measure, and there should be someone to oversee the ruby mines. We need someone to look after things in the South. Once you recover from your religious mania, it'll be a perfect setting. You don't expect a life of high society anyway, not without arms. After all, how can one dance without arms? As for the Vinkis, we don't imagine we'll need an adept stationed there, at least not in your lifetimes. The master plans eradicate any appreciable population in that God-forsaken place. Here the head paused and looked around. Oh, girls, I know you are young. I know this grieves you. You mustn't think of it as a prison sentence, though, but an opportunity. You ask yourselves, how will I grow in a position, albeit a silent one, of prominence and responsibility? How may my talents flourish? How, my dears, how may I help my eyes? Elphaba's foot twisted, caught the edge of a side table, and a cup and saucer fell to the floor and smashed. You're so predictable, said Madame Marble, sighing. That's what makes my job so easy. Now, girls, bound as you are to an oath of silence, I bid you to go away and think on what I have said. Please don't even try to discuss it together, as it'll just give you a headache and cramps. You won't be able to manage it. Sometime in the next semester I will call each of you in here and you can give me your answer. And if you should choose not to help your country in its hour of need, she clasped her hands in a parody of despair, well, you are not the only fish in the sea, are you?